How much do you have to spend to get that classic Neve sound? Over $3,000 or maybe closer to $100? Let's see how the plugins stand up against the high-end hardware. As you may know, there's a few different versions of the Neve products out there. The 1073 is probably the most popular of these, with tons of different clones and emulations available for it. However, I'm more of a fan of the 1084 model that has some additional EQ points and is said to be more musical and more versatile. The actual model I own is made by BAE. This is the 1028 model, they call it. This is based on top of the 1084, but it has even more EQ points available. For today's experiment though, we're only going to use the EQ points available on the 1084 models. BAE is often said to be one of the truest sounding clones available on the market, and while there's a lot of clones available for that slightly cheaper 1073 model, when it comes to the 1084, there's only a select few companies that actually make clones. If you were to buy one of these units new with the needed power supply, you'd spend over $3,000, actually closer to $4,000. So it's no wonder that people often try to go to emulation or plugins to see if they can get as rich of a sound out of that. Now, just as it's true that there's only a few companies that make 1084 hardware clones, there's also only a few companies that make the 1084 plugins. One really good option for this plugin is made by Universal Audio. This UAD plugin, it's a full-fledged 1084 emulation. So it's got the EQ section and the gain stage. While some may say that this UAD emulation is still expensive as far as plugins are concerned, it is less than a tenth of the price of an actual Neve rack unit, though you may need to run this plugin on the actual UAD hardware. Waves also has a Neve emulation, but it's not so great in this case. Their EQ, the VEQ3, is a combination of two different Neve units, the 1073 and the 1066. This will get you most of the EQ points you need to equate to a 1084, but it is lacking a low-pass filter. It's also only emulating the EQ section, so there's no preamp section to this, but it is also cheaper than the UAD. Let's hear how these sound on my kick drum. I'm going to be recording with a DW Collector's Purple Core Maple with the microphone inside of the kick. Then I'm going to split the signal coming from that microphone. One side of that splitter will go through my BAE 1028. Again, I'm only going to use EQ points available on the 1084. In this case, we're looking at high pass filter at 45 Hz, low pass filter at 14 kHz, boosting at 110 Hz, cutting at 1.6 kHz with the high Q off, and finally boosting at 10 kHz. We'll also run this on the 1200 ohm setting. The gain will be driving about 40 decibels, and the output knob will be brought down quite a bit to about the 9 o'clock position. Now that 40 decibels boost is quite a lot, and in addition to bringing the output down, I'm also going to have to go through a minus 20 dB pad on my interface. So why am I driving the gain so hot? Well, because on those hardware units, driving it hot almost causes almost like a compression internal to the unit, and I want to see if the UAD can do the same thing. The other signal from the splitter, that's going to go straight into my interface and then into the computer, and I'll double that track inside the computer. One of those tracks will go to the UAD plugin. I'll use most of the same settings from the hardware, though the UAD uses 8 dot increments for the EQ gain, whereas the BAE uses 9, so I had to make some adjustments there. The plugin is also forcing me to use the line section instead of the mic, so 20 dB of gain is the most I'll get. The duplicated track will go into the Waves plugin. Again, I'm going to try to use all the same settings from the hardware, but obviously I'm not going to be able to use a low pass filter. There'll be no other processing on these tracks, though my other tracks like my snare will have additional processing. When you hear the full mix, note that there's also a sub-frequency mic on the kick drum. So my initial thoughts, let's start with the Wave plugin because that seemed to be the loser of the group. There didn't seem to be anything special, no magic going on in that plugin. It sounded very much still like a basic home recording, and I felt like I could have thrown any other plugin on there and gotten the same result. The UAD seemed to be a significant step up. The low end I thought was pretty good on it. The mids and highs maybe could have used a little bit more work. The BAE, on the other hand, had a very refined sound. The low was punchy, the high was very defined, and there was a good amount of separation between the lows and the highs. As a note, I did check all of these signals with the frequency analyzer on the computer. For the UAD and the BAE, they both seem to have about the same amount of low end, though on the BAE, that low band seemed to be a little bit tighter. On the UAD, it did seem to have more high frequencies, and that high frequency band was also wider. So that made me think that maybe that mid cut and the low pass filter, that those things are not cutting out as much frequencies as the hardware unit is. Those additional frequencies on the UAD is making the track seem louder in the mix, though I don't want them necessarily that strong in the mix. So all in all, I would stay away from the Waves version. For the UAD, it's pretty good. If you were to add some parametric EQ to it and maybe a Pultec, then you would be able to start to get closer to what the BAE gives you. But now you're running 3 different plugins to try to match that hardware version. Whereas with the BAE, once you got that into the computer, if you were to start to add some plugins, then it would really shine. So if you can afford it, go with the hardware, but considering how expensive it is and if you're on a limited budget, go with the UAD and start saving up for a future purchase. Now, what if you want to go with the Neve hardware unit? How might you go about deciding which of the different models is right for you? Well, I have a different video on just that topic, which you can find right over here. Until next time, peace.